So here's our calendar for the upcoming sessions. I'll just, briefly talk about those. Next week we'll be discussing Workday training notifications. And then the following week are our upcoming birthday lookups. This is particularly useful for managers who need to know who of their employees are having, birthdays in the near future. But today's session, of course, is Workday benefits lookup. And again, given the time, I'm going to go ahead and give that. So let's go ahead and take a look at that use case. First are the user experience we wanted to design. So this is going to be reliant on the Workday WQL library. So specifically, I want to go ahead and share what this REST documentation looks like. This is on the Workday REST services directory. And we're going to use the WQL API, specifically the data API endpoint. I recommend, if you're not sure what data you can get back, this data sources endpoint is super helpful to figure out what fields are even available for you to share with your end users. But the actual API call we're going to make is this data call. So we want the user to be able to come to the bot and say, what are my benefits? Something along those lines. We need to make that WQL query, return back any benefits information we have configured, and then share that with the end user. So in this case, we have retirement information, 401k, and PTO information. This is just an example. Really, any data that you have configured for an end user on their all workers data source profile, like their worker profile, then you should be able to configure this as part of that use case. Again, this is a very simple use case. So broadly speaking, we're making a queries use case. The user comes to the bot, asks a question, which triggers the queries workspace use case, which in hand turns to Workday and queries the WQL API, gets that information, formats it, sends it back to the end user. We're going to go ahead and take a look at what this looks like. I have our bot open here, and I'm going to ask something along the lines of, what are the benefits for our test user? So this is a little bit confusing, right? Because you generally don't want to be able to expose your other users' benefits by simply just asking for the email. So what I would recommend is building the use case so you ask the question along something along the lines of, what are my benefits? Because this is going to allow the bot to know that we need to pull out your email address, pass that to Workday, and it's going to prevent the use case from exposing other user data. So, but because we're using a demo environment, I do need to specify an email address. So I've set up the use case to say, what are the benefits for this test user? So we'll go ahead and ask the question, and it will make our API call using the queries use case, look up benefits information, and it'll return, in our case, just retirement eligibility. And in this case, our test user is eligible for retirement. Actually building this use case is fairly straightforward. So let's go ahead and look at what this looks like. We have the query label here. I've just named lookup benefits information with a short description, get your benefits information from Workday. We're going to go ahead and select next. We want a Workday connector. So this is actually a direct API call to Workday. This is not leveraging an iPaaS middle layer. Many Workday use cases do require an iPaaS middle layer, but this queries use case and many queries use cases really do not require that automation, which is nice. So we're going to go ahead and press next again. This is the actual API endpoint we're going to call. So again, we're using the WQL API and we're using the data endpoint. We're going to make a get API call to this endpoint. We do not need a request body or headers configured in this case, but we do need query parameters. So our query parameters here, I've configured our limit to 1. We only expect to have 1 user come back per query. Offset is set to 0. Certainly we don't need this parameter here, but I've set it up in case we want to modify this use case in the future. I'd like this to have all of the available query parameters configured in case you want to make edits in the future. And then finally, you have your query. And this is really the bulk of the use case in a sense. So we want to select, in this case, email, primary work, business title. We want to select worker data as well. So we're going to select from the worker profile the full legal name as well as retirement eligibility field. Again, though, this is very configurable. So any data that you want to return as part of this use case, you would simply need to know what data fields are available for you. Again, you could use the data sources endpoint for the WQL API in Workday to find that information, and then you want to configure that as part of your query. We're going to make that query to all workers, where email primary work is, in this case, again, the email we pass. But I would recommend building this use case If you actually do this to build this as user.email adder, and then not have the query actually pull out the email address from the user's question. Reason being, again, this prevents the user from asking benefits information for other users. But given that this is a demo, we need to ask passing a specific email address. So we're going to use query, and then again, we're going to use our example user smorgan at workday.net. Go ahead and test. We need to get back this JSON response. You can see the past response, but it's going to be pretty much the same this time too. We get a response code of 200. We'll get business title, primary work email address, and the worker data. So in this case, just the retirement eligibility and full legal name. Finally, we need to configure API labeling. This is sort of the last use case configuration step is how I would describe it. We do have triggering parameters, but that is more for how you get the use case to work, right? So in this case, I've set the full legal name and the user's email address as the identifier and description. Again, if you're building this use case such that it only allows users to look up their own information, you probably don't need to include this information since they'll already know this. But maybe you include something like their title, or maybe their worker classification, things like that, really, whatever data is going to help set the scene for the user experience we're trying to build. Again, I'm going to include business title here, really just to have additional information as part of the return, as well as the retirement eligibility. So we want to go ahead and label this as business title, retirement eligibility, and then this is the example value that we'll return, which if you look at our demo, is sort of set up this way. So it's going to say retirement eligibility, and then that example value comes back as eligible now. So once we have this all configured, we can go ahead and select next. Again, we don't need a follow-up action. I do want to stop here for a moment. There is a couple of things that I can think of that would be useful to use follow-up actions for. One would be if you have benefits information come back, and you want them to be able to then go directly to their benefits page, you might add a redirect to URL and then pass them over to whatever their benefits page is if they need more additional information or want to make changes to their benefits profile. You can also have this ask clarifying questions and execute a solution. But again, I really don't know that you would need anything more than no follow-up action. Again, in this case, we're really just trying to get back information about their benefits, present that to them. If they have any additional questions, they can always ask follow-up questions. But really, this redirect to a URL is a possibility. Our demo will not use one. We're just going to say no follow-up action. Finally are our triggering and parameters. So you can see these are all the sort of generated ones that the bot has come up with, that Creator Studio has come up with. So what are the benefits for our test user? What is the retirement eligibility for our test user? These are going to be the really big, useful ones for our demo. But again, if you would have more information, such as 401k information, you might say, what is the 401, what are the details of my 401k match? Maybe something along those lines that would return then their 401k match, assuming that's configured as a field that they can view on their user profile in Workday. And finally, we have launch. So launch to selected emails. In this case, I only want to launch to myself just because, again, this is a demo, this is a demonstration, but you can imagine using this as an option when you're developing this use case as well. So that way only developers have access to view this use case while it's being created. You can also launch to all users. This is what I would probably recommend once you have this use case ready to go. Launch to all users and then say, yes, it's ready to be launched in production. This enables analytics down here. You can also block selected emails if you only want to enable this for everybody except for, say, executives. Maybe there's a different use case they should use instead. And lastly, but not least, launch to the users matching the rule. You can build a rule here and say that this is only available to managers, or this is only available to the finance team, or this is only available to whatever subset of users that this use case is relevant to. But again, today we're going to use launch to selected emails. I've already shown you the use case, so I won't demonstrate again. But that is how you build this use case. Finally, I can share the sort of follow-up resources that you can use if you would like to build a similar use case or any other use case. The first resource I'd like to share is our developer certification course for Creator Studio on our Academia portal. You should have access to Academy, assuming you have access to Moveworks SSO. So what I mean by that is if you have access to analytics or Moveworks setup, I would expect you to have access to this. But if you do not, please reach out to your CS team and we'll help you get connected. But once you have access to the Academy portal, You can find all sorts of step-by-step video guides on setting up new use cases, specifically within the Creator Studio certification. We actually offer several other certifications as well. But at the end of the course and training modules, there's a certification multi-choice exam that you can then get to share on LinkedIn to show your knowledge about Creator Studio. Finally, our documentation and developer community. Very quickly, the documentation portal resource I'd like to share most that I think would be most helpful for you guys here are our tutorials and guides section. You'll find setup guides for authentication, basically setting up connectors for things like Workday. This is going to be step one, really, when building a use case, is setting up your connector. So I highly recommend going to tutorials and guides. There's also guides on how to set up specific use cases, which can be really helpful both for following along to set up exactly or just as an ideation tool. Lastly is the developer community. This is sort of your online forum for all things Moveworks. So you can go and ask questions that other customers, product owners, engineers, customer success folks like myself can answer questions to or ask follow-up. So a really good discussion place, lots of good information to be found there for sure. Again, I know we're running really low on time. We will post the recording here shortly, and we can always have additional follow-up around that recording. But thank you again for joining us this week. If you have any other questions or really just would like to reach out and talk, please write me up on community. Feel free to reach out to your CS team. I'm sure they can connect you with me as well. But either way, thank you very much. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you guys in a few weeks.